Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osterberg501 and today I want to go over a bunch of new information we got for weapons in Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. And the first bit of information we're going over has to do with the melee weapons in the game, because melee weapons in Wonderlands are their own actual weapon type and are going to play out in similar ways to how guns have been in all the other Borderlands games. Wonderlands melee weapons come in 4 different flavors: two-handed blades, swords, axes, and blunt weapons like hammers and morning stars. Within each weapon class are dozens of different options. There are 12 different types of blades in the sword weapon class alone, and the modular system for melee weapons is completely new, making it separate from the system used for guns. Swords, for example, have mods on the hilt and the blade. The hilt mods offer bonuses to your character while you have the sword equipped. One example was a mod to gather ammo during melee attacks, so while you're dealing close range damage, you can also replenish your munitions. Blade mods come with stat modifications and look cooler. These numerous modifications all draw from the same pool of assets, and you can imagine how quickly those possible combinations can add up to massive amounts of variety. Just like guns of Borderlands, the melee weapons also have manufacturers. Valora makes two-handed swords, Swift makes one-handed swords, Cleave is the go-to for axes, and Bonk is your one-stop shopping choice for blunt weapons. So like I mentioned, melee weapons are going to have a ton of variety and act in similar ways to how weapons work. There's going to be a ton of different types of all the different melee weapons. They have their own manufacturers like we mentioned, and then they're going to have different roles on their blades and their hilts. So there's going to be a ton of variety, and I can definitely see melee builds being a pretty big thing, especially with melee having the lunge that they've shown off before, which you haven't seen. Essentially all the melee weapons just give you a pretty big lunge at your target, so I could definitely see a melee build that's focused on going through maps very quickly and utilizing that lunge to new enemies very effectively to move very fast. Melee weapons, with the exception of two-handed blades, have a glide to their attack, meaning you can strike an enemy with a melee attack before they're close enough to do the same to you. What's better is how this opens up combo attacks. So an example of this would be melee towards an enemy, stagger them, then hit them with a spell, and then a gun. And then you add in all the possible effects between all those different things in that combination. There can be a ridiculous amount of variety. Also, you are now able to melee chests to open them, and I'm wondering if that's going to make them open faster than just using the prompt like normal Borderlands. And we did get some additional information for the guns of Wonderlands, and the developers have talked a lot about the guns working in pretty similar ways, but the main difference being they're trying to create weapons that fit in with this more fantasy style element of the game, and trying to figure out what weapons Tiny Tina, as the dungeon master of the game, would come up with. Borderlands has elemental weapons like acid and fire, for example, and Wonderlands throws magic into the mix. They're functionally similar, but have that fantasy world Wonderlands spin on them. The inclusion of magic types into the mix was an answer to the team asking itself, what would Tiny Tina bring to the Borderlands weapon system? One example was a positively beastly shotgun barrel. It's an almost unwieldy piece of weaponry, practically a hand cannon, brutish, savage, and uncouth, both in appearance and the damage it deals. And to reload this monument to violence, you delicately sprinkle fairy dust into a cup of crystals sitting near the hilt, and it's a perfect encapsulation of the vision of the weapons design team. And we've actually seen a few weapons that work like this, and I think we've even seen the specific one they're talking about, but some of the weapons will have a clump of crystals on it, and how they reload is they just sprinkle some dust on these crystals. And a bunch of the weapons they've also shown off also have magical runes on them, which I definitely think is a really cool aesthetic thing to fit in with a more fantasy universe. They're using this magic to fuel the weapon. As far as other rarity levels, the Wonderlands team didn't say, but they did say there are enchantments which affect different levels of rarity. So if you're one of the players who obsess over finding the perfect combination of RNG, Wonderlands has that in store for you. Now this last part is incredibly interesting because they're saying there's weapons with different enchantments on them, and this could essentially be Wonderland's version of anointed weapons. Now I do hope hope it works quite a bit differently and that they take more inspiration from fantasy games or from MMOs that have enchants on their weapons, and it's not anointments, because anointments in Borderlands 3 were so strong and kind of so ridiculous that the weapon itself didn't matter as much as the anointment you had on it. So it felt like the weapon was the enchantment itself and the anointment was actually the thing you were farming. So I'm hoping that this enchantment system is more like you get this weapon and then it's something extra on top you can try to farm on. So maybe it's like a fiery enchant or a frost enchant or something along those lines, something that's not a 300% damage increase 100% of the time, like how a bunch of builds of Borderlands 3 played out, where you would need that specific anointment. And I think there's a lot of other stuff they could potentially do with enchantments that could get around the pitfalls of the anointment system, but there is going to be some system like that in Wonderlands. And some of this information just reaffirms what I've said many times about Wonderlands, that the build potential is easily the most exciting thing about the game. Because not only do we have multi-classing, we have a bunch of new gear pieces to equip, bunch of new stats, new elements, all that type of stuff. We now also have the inclusion of melee weapons with their own randomization, their own parts, their own manufacturers, and their own stats that you can mix in to all of the other potentials of spells, of multi-classing, of guns, all that type of stuff. So you could potentially have a build that's almost completely focused on just melee damage. Or you could have a build where using your melee weapon does something to buff your spell, then you spam out your spells, or you have a gun that maybe buffs up your melee damage or something like that. There are a ridiculous amount of possibilities with each system by itself, and then mixing all these systems together. I think this Borderlands has a potential to have more usable builds than all of the other Borderlands combined. But that's pretty much all I wanted to go over for this new information for Wonderlands. So subscribe if you want to see more Wonderlands or other videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about all this new information for the weapons of the game, and thanks for watching.